Welcome to Lead Live, a conversation for ministry leaders by ministry leaders. I'm Josh Franks.
And I'm Clint Berry, and we're the co-founders of the Lead program. Today on the show, we're joined by Pastor Zach Meerkreebs to talk about healing from hurt in ministry. Well, hey, welcome in, leaders. My name is Clint Berry. I'm alongside Josh Franks. Maybe this way. Can't ever tell where you are. And hey, it's good. Good to be back, brother. We've taken the last 3 weeks off to have a little bit of a break between season 1 and season 2. And today we get to have a really great conversation about hurt in ministry. So, Josh, how you doing?
I'm doing well, man. I'm excited for episode 1 of season 2. Can't believe we've had so many conversations. Hopefully they're helpful in equipping men and women to be ministry leaders in the conversation that those folks are having. So like you said, I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. Church hurt, pastoral pain, it's a real thing. And we need to, even in this season, COVID-19, racial tension, just line up 2020, maybe an asteroid will head towards Earth. I don't know. But there is a lot of you're darned if you do and you're darned if you don't in this season. And I think that could make its way into just kind of nipping at your pastor, or you've been nipped at as a pastor or a ministry leader. Cause it's just whatever decision I make, I'll make a mistake and somebody's going to be mad at me, So to help with, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think you're totally right. We know that there are hundreds, if not more, pastors and ministry leaders that are leaving ministry every month, mainly because of the hurt that they've experienced. They're burnout. They're tired. They're tired of dealing with difficult people, and they haven't recovered. They haven't healed from the wounds that have been inflicted upon them. And this season, those things aren't going away. You can kind of muscle through and ride the adrenaline wave in these things for a certain amount of time, but at some point, it's all going to catch up to you. And I think, honestly, we're going to see a huge wave of men and women leaving ministry in the next several months. So yeah. I'm excited for this conversation.
Absolutely. So with that, let's welcome to the show Zach Meerkreebs. Zach, welcome in, buddy. How you doing?
Doing all right.
Man, it's good to see you.
Baggage and hurt.
Yeah, well done. Bring all the bags. That's good. Wow. Zach, why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself, family, your ministry, a little bit of your background. So just introduce yourself, bro.
Yeah. So I'm Zach, and I am married to the beautiful Kristen, who I call KP. So if I say Kristen and KP, I'm not married to two women. I have a daughter named Eden, who is about 3 years old. And those are really just the item what I get to do. But currently, I get to serve on staff at First Alliance Church in Lexington, Kentucky, as their evangelism and outreach pastor. I get to do global missions, local outreach, and equip our church to be more evangelistic minded. But before that, I've planted a couple churches, passionate about leadership development, and I think that's it.
Man, great. That's awesome.
Sweet, man. So in the midst of all of your ministry experience, I'm sure you've never experienced any wounding from people or circumstances. The reality is you don't have to be in ministry very long to realize that A, it's not as easy as Zach makes it look, and B, people are hard because we bring our own stuff into the mix.
Yeah.
And then obviously people are bringing, like you said, their baggage into things. So would you be willing to share a little of your story regarding some of the hurt that you've experienced in ministry?
Yeah. So ministry for me, I think some of the hurt is internal, how I've responded to the realities that I've been presented. I think when we talk about hurt as pastors, some people will never ever know it. It wasn't an email. It wasn't a meeting with the board. It wasn't something nasty, but in the process. So the process of ministry, you get hurt. And so did ministry, missions work and college ministry while I was going through college, and then was hired by a pastor to come lead college ministry in this large, successful mega church. The pastor was coming out with a book that was, the forward was written by some hotshot pastor. So like everything in me, like I remember even in our ministry, like graduation, the ministry department, you know, I felt like a rock star. Like I had gotten picked up by this thing, this church. And quickly after arriving, I remember even in my interview, I was in an interview with my fiance at the time, now my wife, and my wife leaned over and said, I don't know what we've gotten ourselves into. And like a good holy husband, I said, don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. And we quickly found out that there was levels of unhealth that we were immediately being asked to do things that were just really absurd, being at work till 3 or 4 in the morning. And I remember turning in proposals for ministry initiatives and sneaking Starbucks gift cards into the pages so they would read the entire proposal. Like that was the culture we were in. And about a year into working there, there was a large moral failure. Our lead pastor and executive pastor had a moral failure. And the lead pastor was the guy who hired me and had really walked beside me. This is my first big boy job, kind of. And as we talk about hurt, you know, I come from a broken home. My dad is still in prison for some things. And so to me, it wasn't only like this pastor had hurt me, but I also had to, I think something that we have to address to some of us, maybe it's just me. Though God is perfect, we can perceive things as, you've brought me here to experience this. So I had to deal with hurt all over the place from all different directions, whether I was right or wrong. And I think we're going to talk about that. Like we're rarely ever totally right or totally wrong. And, but in that, it just turned into a time of a lot of turmoil. Some other pastors had to leave to get healthy. And in that, the pressure became very, very high. There's things we could even talk about in that. And then I got to a place of substantial unhealth. And I think in the moment, I definitely downplayed what I did. I had exaggerated and lied about some things, and which is totally wrong in a position that I was in. It's totally wrong all the time. But if you didn't know, tell your kids. Don't. But in that moment, I downplayed it. I was 100% the victim. This is crazy. This seems like a total exaggerated process, right? And went through a 6-month restoration process and had to do a lot of work with hurt, not just from the church, but in my own life. And then coming out of that, becoming a lead pastor. If you're a lead pastor listening, you know that I remember someone asked, what's the difference between being a youth pastor, college pastor, and a lead pastor? And I remember the quickest way I could answer that was the ratio of good and hard flip. Like when I was a youth pastor, like once in a while you deal with something pretty tough and pretty hard. And usually they're pretty tough. And then when I stepped into lead pastorate, the majority of stuff was hard decisions, tough emails, and then you got these like golden nuggets. And it revealed once again places of development I needed to work through hurt, to succeed through hurt. So, and then was the lead pastor planter there. And one thing I think it would be really awesome to talk about is some of you guys probably and hopefully are developing leaders actively. And when you develop leaders, you're so vulnerable, you're giving so much away that there's even hurt sometimes in those relationships. You know, as a lead pastor, you've poured so much into a staff member or an intern, and there's can be hurt there. So the Lord redirected my wife and I towards missions. We thought maybe we were going to be overseas, but we ended up at a church in the same city. It went really well. The transition went well, and we're here on staff for about 6 months so far. So
cool. Thanks for sharing all of that with us, Zach. I really appreciate just like your transparency, because the baggage stuff is hard to talk about. I know, every show we kind of have these, pre-conversations, and so we were talking, and like, yeah, I mean, as soon as the topic of this came up, I'm like, I went and walked back through some of my pastoral hurt, and one of the things that maybe a direction to start is going through it is one thing. So then what are the ways in which God uses, to bring healing? What are some of those ways? Like for me, some of it has just been distance. It's just been time. And time has brought focus and differentiation. That was my fault. That was the church's fault. We didn't see eye to eye. And so the more time that has come, the healing has happened. But what are some other ways that you've experienced, like as the Lord has used to really like bind up the wounds that you experienced in ministry over the years? What are some other ways that you've found, Zach?
Yeah, I think one of the primary ways, which it's cool to be a part of this conversation, working with you guys, is you guys' role in the church to develop leaders. I think one way that the Lord has totally utilized my hurt is to catalyze a deep passion for developing leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I am appreciative of formal education. I'm currently in a program that is formal, and I will get a nice piece of paper at the end. But we have to create settings to develop leaders to deal with their hurt, but also create tools and grow in self-awareness, because they will be actively working through hurt, whether it's a nasty email or which might feel just like itchy, annoying, but they can hurt. Right after you step off stage and you're already feeling maybe insecure about something you preached about, it's like inevitable at some point in your ministry journey that someone's going to say the exact thing that's going to set you off, Right. And how do you lean in as a pastor and not shut off as a pastor? So I think one huge thing is the Lord has actually probably turned the heat up on my calling and given me even clear directives towards my calling through my hurt. Of like, how do we really equip people for the work of ministry, not by their competency and knowledge, but how are they self-aware from their hurt? Through working through this hurt, looking backwards, realized that because of some hurt from my childhood, I struggle a ton. My biggest struggle is intimidation. So when I'm intimidated, then I can act out. That's when I can strive, or in real honest raw, like from my intimidation, I'm tempted to then exaggerate so I can meet someone's expectations of myself, right? Or my projected. So, but I wouldn't have known that through work, and if I didn't work through that hurt. So I think he's served me through clarifying my calling, accelerating self-awareness. I think hurt accelerates self-awareness if you deal with it correctly.
That's right.
So let's talk about that a little,
Yeah.
Zach, because I appreciate what you're saying as far as a heart for developing leaders. We're all on the same page with that and believe that self-awareness is a significant part of that. So you can allow her to hone in your self-awareness, or you can continue to turn a blind eye. So let's give some really practical pieces. How do you choose to allow the thing that you're going through that's difficult and painful to bring greater self-awareness? What are some of the practical steps maybe some leaders that are watching could take?
Yeah, if you're hurting and you don't want it to be wasted, it's sad that we probably have to say this, but have you talked to Jesus about it? Like, have you gone there and said, Jesus, where are you? Like, are we creating settings as leaders for other leaders or ourselves to say, I'm going to sit in this and let Jesus order my thoughts and order my emotions, right? And if you have to go revisit in your thoughts or heart that board meeting that was just humiliating, and you didn't feel supported, or you didn't feel covered by your elders, or whatever example, you need to sit there and like allow the Holy Spirit to speak to you. Ask the question, Jesus, I know you're present. Like, you're sitting at the conference table. What were you thinking? What were you saying? And be raw. Like, I love, that's like some of the great stuff about Pete Scazzero's like emotional healthy stuff, is we gotta be emotionally healthy enough to sit in that in the healthy ways, not just wallow in our hurt, but sit in it and let us be formed by it. I think it's sad that we have to say that in a Christian conversation, like, go talk to Jesus about it. But I forget that often. Like, I had a meeting earlier today that, like, before I talk about hurt, I was like, shoot, I should probably do some work. And I think I was really hurt by that conversation.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one. I think the power of community is so key. Like, there's been times, like, I've called Josh on the way, literally from one meeting to pick up my daughter from daycare. And it's almost awkward because I sit in the daycare parking lot for so long because we're in a conversation of like, tell me where I'm like being a punk or a wimp, or tell me where, like, no, you got to set some boundaries there. You got to, that's probably been once or twice in our friendship, Josh, but
Sure.
There's a couple other people in my life that I give them permission to do that. So there's some really, really some healthy ways. I know that a lot of us roll in the circles of soul care, and you have to create space. You have to create space to have these conversations. If you're like, for me, I take Sabbath super serious. I did grow up Orthodox Jew, and people they're like, oh, that's why. No, I make it because it's scriptural. Right. And if I don't create time to stop and delight in Jesus, but also let him like rejuvenate me and talk to me about my hurt, then it just balls up. And that's the reason it gets toxic.
Yeah, I think what a lot of leaders don't understand is that if you don't take that time to spend with the Lord, really honestly, in a raw way, even if you're broken, like, to come with that brokenness and say, man, I'm really hurt. Will you show me what I need to know? Show me what's true. If we don't actually spend time processing that, the hurt still controls us. Like, a lot of leaders are just like, fine, well, I'll show him, and they double down on
they grit their
effort teeth. Or approval or work. You say I'm not good enough, I'm gonna spend twice the amount on my message prep, or I'm gonna do, for me, I'll do it better than you, right? You tell me I'll do it better than you. I want to one up somebody else. And it's not that you've actually overcome that situation or that hurt or that pain. The thing is still controlling you because it's driving your behavior instead of the spirit driving your behavior and obedience.
It's the honest truth is you're going to either spend time now or you're going to spend probably a lot more time later. And it's probably going to cost more because you're going to have to pay a counselor or something.
Right.
But
I found in my
I
found in my experience, it's like but those times of sitting, Zach, I think those hurt. Like, and you have to feel that. And our culture is not built, even our church culture is not built to sit in this pain for very long. I mean, we are like enculturated to move on, right? Yeah. Hey, that happened. That was a real thing. Move on, right? You made an error in the second inning or that. Yeah. And so we really need to like sit before that. And I know that with some of my hurt, like I didn't even know what to say to the Lord, right? I mean, I just sat there hurting.
Yeah.
And that's awful, right? And so I think that's the other bit of this, that no one from the outside, like my wife or my children, they're not going to be able to put a Band-Aid on this thing, but it hurts. The elders, they could come and apologize, but it's still not going to take care of it. So, the leader that I've been hurt from could come back to me today and say, I'm sorry. That still isn't going to get there. The only one who can get there is Jesus by the Holy Spirit. But to have him do some surgery into your heart in that particular place to repair and to clean out some of that debris that's in there, right? The festering, and then the places where I have made it worse, it's awful. And so I think that there's some of that we don't love doing because it is so hard to do. And that doesn't matter. It's not just pastoral leadership or like pastor on pastor crime. That's not what we're talking about. Like it's like more even like congregants or whatever, but going before the Lord. Like I try to have a discipline when I'm doing Bible study. Like I have a question: is there anyone I need to forgive? Because what I found is that I don't think that I have a list or a harboring list until the Lord like begins to go, hey, you haven't been keeping a small account list. Like it's a long one. And I have had to like write to just get it out. And then I had to erase the board, and then I had to get it out again. And then I had to replace with the truth because I was just harboring. So that's a lot. But you really have got to, I'm not really a journaler, but I do write it down. Like I'm a list guy, so I like the list. And it's a great way to get it out. And I just don't really try to frame it. I don't try to quantify it. I'm like, this was said. This is how I felt. I'm this way about it. Yeah. And just to get it out and then to say, Lord, I forgive them. Because we have to remember that forgiveness is a one-way deal, right? Reconciliation is two ways. But forgiveness is me offering you forgiveness for what's wrong has been done. Same thing, Jesus on the cross, right? Yeah. So thankfully, through Christ, we now have reconciliation to God and to others, and so we can lean into that, for the next steps. But I harbor so much. I don't know about you guys, but I have a list, man. And even though it's not at the top of my head, it's in there in my heart. So it's interesting. It's interesting space for me.
I think it's cool to hear you share some ways that you feel like you've learned about yourself, Clint, as far as like you're a harborer. For me, I'm a spite guy. I don't necessarily harbor towards anybody, but the next time I see you, I'm going to outdo you, right? Yeah. I'm going to show you up. And so when I know that's circulating in my mind and my heart, like I can't wait to meet this guy so I can show him whatever language you want to use.
And I'm a victim, so I just try to get as many people around on my side, and it's just gross. Like for me, like it's just icky. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you feel like you're recruiting people to your side, okay, this is not a good thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of self-awareness pieces. Go ahead, Zach.
Well, I had a conversation with one of our good friends, Ed, and I was going through some hurt, and I said, Ed, does ministry get any more fun? Because this is not fun. And we were sitting on my back patio, and he says, you know what? It doesn't get more fun, but you get so much closer to Jesus. And you have to realize, like, he challenged me. He said, if the more you get into ministry, the more you lead, it is so clearly has to be for only one person, and that's Jesus.
Yep.
And I can almost every time I'm hurt, it's because in my heart, I was doing it for myself, doing it for maybe even the person who hurts me. But if I, in my process of healing from hurt, I had this guy who I hope one day, I would just love to tell the story with him someday, but he was an elder at that church, gruff little guy, like a leprechaun, and his skin was made of leather. Like, he's just gruff. I live in Kentucky, so you can just imagine it, right? But when I resigned and was going through my healing, he called me every morning for 3 months. And the first time he called me, I remember he said, "Son, what does Galatians 2:20 say?" I'm like, I don't know. Like, why would I, He's like, "Well, memorize it and call me back." And of course I didn't do that because I was salty. Next day, "Son, what does Galatians 2:20 say?" And after a while, I memorized that verse, right? But it's ultimately saying, I've been crucified with Christ. I no longer live, but I live in him, And he started asking me questions. Does a crucified man get his feelings hurt? And I was like, oh, I don't know. He's like, does a dead man have opinions? And it's just this gruff, like Kentucky man. And I just realized I hear that when I'm dealing with hurt, especially in pastoral ministry, when I get an email or it's like, I'm 100% doing this as a crucified person representing Jesus. Like, my flesh has been crucified. My debt has been crucified. Their debt has been crucified, and you have to create space to be hurt, but then also remind yourself that we're crucified. And that's tough.
Yeah. I think there's a difference, though, when you're taking friendly fire, let's say.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's from a teammate. It's from a congregant that you've been trying to serve, like, the very best that you possibly can. And now they might lob a grenade over here or there, or they'll snipe you from somewhere. That hurts a whole lot more than like a non-believer who you're ministering to, right? And they let you down, and you're like, man, that's okay. Like, cause you don't even know what you're doing. Like, it's more like Jesus, like, I'll take that, like, nail, kabang, cause you don't know what you're doing. But then when the church family, like, really begins to beat on you, and again, it's like, and I was sharing with you guys earlier, it's like, and I don't know where to attribute this quote, but it's like the man-eating minnow. It's like, it's not this big shark, like, biting you in half. It's like one nibble after another nibble after another nibble. And you stack all of those up over a course of time. And you're just like, can you just stop, biting me? Like, that's all I want is for this to go away. And I think that those types of hurts are even greater within the church family. And a lot of it just has to do with, they don't see my motivations and I don't see theirs. And so then we get all crosswayed because my motivation was some kind of way trying to move them or move something forward. They didn't see my motivation because those are internal to me. And then they reacted, and we're not usually like assuming the best in each other. And we're not really thinking like, well, they're trying to help me in some kind of way. And then there's friction and sparks are flying, but it's not iron sharpening iron, because it's not in a, I'm looking up at you in love. It's like, I want to beat you down because you've messed with something that's mine. And that kind of hurt is even more crazy, especially coming from the congregation, I think. No, they're more insane pieces coming from your other staff mates, like your brothers in crime, like to be on that team of people and to be in that inner circle, whether you're, leading the charge or a part of that team. When somebody begins to backbite you or something like that, you're like, whoa, wait a second. I thought we were on the same page. Those types of things are crazy as well. So yeah, I mean, there are all these different factors that we as leaders have to realize that these things are coming. And what you've articulated, like, listen, ministry is fun, and then sheep do stuff that you don't understand because they're weird, right? But you still love them, and you still want them to grow, and so you're still after them, but it gets weird, right? You're just like, wow, how much more?
Yeah.
So, but we have to realize as leaders that this kind of stuff is coming because, yes, we've all been crucified, and yet it's now and still, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we are still being crucified, and we still are dealing with sin nature, and we're still dealing with those pieces as well. Yeah, just so interesting.
Makes me think of a quote from my gym. You start out going to a gym, and you're like, man, things are tough. Is it ever going to get easier? And my coach says it doesn't get easier. The weights just get heavier. And I think that's kind of what happens in ministry. If you allow the Lord to form you through the good times and the really painful times, is you realize, okay, the minnow bites don't hurt as bad anymore, but there are times and things just hurt differently when the weight gets heavier. Maybe your domain or your influence expands or increases, or people give you more say in their life, just from a personal responsibility level. So Zach, I appreciate you sharing some things about your hurt, how you process, the encouragement to go sit at the feet of Jesus, allow him to bring awareness and understanding, to bring those things and to be raw and honest in community. And often we think of community and we think of a large group of people, but it could just be one other person, could be two other people that you give permission to speak directly into your life, hold you accountable, but that love and care for you. So then how has healing come? Like, what are the steps towards healing for you that you've taken?
I've created, or I've watched God create guardrails for further healing, right? It's like I played soccer in college, and it's like when you blow out your knee, that's not very fun. And then you have surgery, and then you have the physical therapy, and then they ease you back into the game until you have full contact. And when we experience hurt, not all of us will step off staff or jump off these things, but there is a restoration for your own soul that I think can come from leaders, from rhythms of Sabbath, confession, going to the feet of Jesus. So a lot of the healing that has come, it actually came from one of my family members who's not walking with the Lord, and he just reminded me to stay foolish. And I think a lot of times in ministry, we, especially when we get hurt, we start taking it more serious. We start taking ourselves more serious. We start taking, this is we talk about it so much like this is a spiritual war, which is scriptural. So I'm not taking that away, but you read the words of Jesus, and he reminds us to be like a child. And I think a lot of my healing has been me asking the Lord to keep me foolish and childlike, that if I'm really an empty vessel, then I gotta stay empty and let him feel that. So I think some of that is just the work to stay soft through prayer, scripture, community. Another thing I think that a lot of healing comes from is pursuing a place to like close the loop on some of these things. Like if it's an open loop, you're just gonna keep on thinking and feeling.
Explain that thought a little bit more.
Yeah,
about
that's good.
So how do you let God resolve something for you, whether you have the end goal or all the knowledge you need? And it's usually a very spiritual thing to make a decision with the Lord to say, I trust you with this. It's a practice that I do a lot. And it's very similar to the question you ask yourself during quiet time, Clint, is, God, what do you want me to hand over to you? And what do you want to hand to me?
That's good.
And a lot of times he wants me to hand over hurt.
Yeah.
So even, I'll get in an argument with my wife. That sometimes happens to pastors. Who would have thought? But, and during my quiet time, you're realizing, like, I'm clinging on to this so hard, and he's asking me to hand it over. And then you act like a child talking to the Father, saying, what do you want to give back to me?
Yep.
And, it changes the game. Yeah. We do that. I'm doing that with in premarital tonight is one of the exercises I'm doing with a couple of, like, grip your hands, and you could do this as a pastor in your office. Grip your hands and look at it and say, what is in your fist that you don't want to give up?
Yep.
And it might be that darn dude keeps on emailing me about the volume in the sanctuary, or it might be, I thought this was a really good idea and they all voted and I thought they had my back, or maybe you're a staff pastor and you're like, I just don't think I'm getting taken serious enough here. Or,
sure.
I think you touched on this, Clint, of saying, keeping a short account, but really just staying in conversation with Jesus. Do you want me to hold on to that?
Mm-hmm.
So some of these rhythms, Sabbath has been a huge part of my healing. This concept of rest, really meditating on this idea of, like, I experienced Sabbath religiously before Christ, and it didn't do anything besides frustrate me. But now I experience Sabbath, and it's different. I can turn on my light switch. I can drive to a coffee shop and get a cappuccino during my Sabbath now. But I can tell if I've gone a week without Sabbath. I can tell. My family can tell. And it's not because I'm a big baby. I hope not. It's just, I have to keep the work of resting, stopping, delighting, and then letting him address me. So a lot of rhythms, a lot of personal practices. And then one thing that I think pastors really stink at is, one of the things that I had missing in my life for a long, long time was friendship. I think we have community. I've even mentioned community, and we talk about maybe that one person, and maybe that's a mentor who's sharpening you. But some of the most healing stuff that I've experienced in the last 2 years is a group of pastors. None of them work at the church that I work at, but we're all doing work in the city, and we're all known, and we're friends. That's cool. And those are the conversations that I'm having real hurt, and I can be real raw. And they have full permission to put me in my place, or say, man, that stinks. And I don't have to worry about an email maybe going to the elders because I said something, because they don't got a dog in the hunt. That's what we say in Kentucky. So friendship has been huge. Rhythms have been huge. And to be honest, I believe in counseling. I think we've talked a lot about the spiritual aspects of hurt, going to the feet of Jesus, but having someone, pastors have a hard time submitting to other pastors or other counselors. I've seen that, right? Yeah. It's the same thing. My wife is a medical provider, and when she's sick, it's like, I'm like, we have doctors that you can go like talk to, well, pastors do the same thing. Like
Yep.
we might have a full day of meeting with people, counseling with them. And then we get in the car and we will never call a counselor to set up a meeting.
No.
So
I think there's a bit of shame built into that, right? We feel like we should know the answer. We're supposed to know the answer and be helpful to people who come to us. And yet I should know the answer, but the knowledge of it isn't enough to affect what I'm feeling. And it's not closing the loop yet.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's shame that we have, I think, as ministry leaders that prevent us from moving forward and being open and honest in that and asking for help from someone else.
There's a great resource. There's 4 books that I have every young leader read ever start like a more formal process with. And one of them is Dangerous Calling by Paul David Tripp. Have you guys read that?
I've not, no.
And it's great. There's a couple chapters on elder boards. How do you create a space that your lead pastor can be hurting and honest? Lead pastors, how do you create a staff culture that your people can be hurting and frustrated with you and not afraid of getting fired, right? And then ministry leaders, how do you create a space that your people can be hurting and they don't have to? And it's all around this idea that ministry is a dangerous calling because we have unique lives that we can listen to that most people, if you need help, you ask for help. Well, pastors have this lie of like, I need help, but I shouldn't ask for help because that's my job.
That's right.
So it's a great resource if anyone wants to snag it.
That's great. We actually just dropped that into the program notes, so you can get that in the Facebook, Periscope or YouTube links. So just scroll through the comments and you can check that out on Amazon. Let me just say, listeners, if you have any questions, just go ahead and drop us a comment. There's been a couple that have come in, but if you have questions or comments, we'd love to engage with you in the time that we have remaining. Zach, also there probably are. I don't know the percentage split, but some are going to be ministry leaders, pastors who are listening and watching. Others are congregation folks, right? They're high octane volunteers. They've experienced some ministry hurt. But I think my mind is kind of going towards like, what could a congregation member, a church member, a ministry leader, how could they encourage their pastor? Maybe they know of some hurt, or that had to be a zinger, like in the meeting, or, they were on the email string coming through or something. What can all of us do for our pastors or ministry leaders that we're submitting to or alongside that could be a real help, in your opinion? Like, what have you done maybe to encourage other leaders, or how have you been encouraged by those that you lead?
Yeah. I feel silly saying this, but I get this picture of, in basketball when you box out and it's like, how can you box out for your leaders that they can do the work, right? And it's advocating and praying for your leader in that moment. Yeah. And not that they're high and mighty and they'll, but to create some space for them. To ask the question. I think a lot of people are afraid to lead up. And
what does that mean? Explain that a little bit. What does that mean to lead up?
To lead up and ask the question, hey, I saw that email. How are you doing? Like, we are almost like afraid to ask that because this is the thing. Your leader could be like, totally fine. I'm good. Well, at least you created space and you're being obedient to what you might be getting a hint towards. So asking the question, creating the space for your people. And then I'm super passionate, as you can hear, about Sabbath and rhythms, is fight for your pastors to have rhythms.
Yeah.
Like if they're on Sabbath and they respond to your text, well, first of all, just don't text them if you know they're on Sabbath. But, or like, I had such a generous gift for I was a pastor of this church for 4 years, and they sent me on sabbatical. And there's a lot of pastors I sit with, they're like, I could never do sabbatical. And they don't have a good reason. They just couldn't ever do it. And so if you're sitting in a church, advocate for your people to go on vacation, go on sabbatical, like tune out. Because like, if you would love their leadership, give them ways to continue to lead you long term.
That's right.
That's
good.
If you want them to run at sprint level, like speed, then expect that from them. But you won't get their best that long.
Yeah,
you just won't.
That's good.
That is really good. Zach, I appreciate you sharing. Part of your story is being on staff in a church where there was pastoral failure. One of our questions is from Les. He asked, are there any nuggets for congregational hurt after pastoral failure? Right, keeping in mind, like, there's multi tiers of something. There's the pastoral failure. There's the ripple effects through the staff, if there are staff. There's elder and leadership teams that are now dealing with it from both ends, right? You talk about leading up. The staff is like, how do we help those above us? How do we help the congregation? How do we help our leadership? And then from the congregational standpoint, they're probably most out of the loop of all of those conversations. And I think that hurt can almost, they're just striving to know something or to be helped or in some way. So there's keeping in mind all of those facets. And of course, you've gone through it and experienced some of those things. Anything that jump out that could provide help for those that are ministry leaders, helping a church in the midst of pastoral failure?
Yeah. The first thing, which maybe isn't helpful for this question, but I think is important, but as pastors, I think we can care for our people and set them up for, like, God forbid, you never plan on something like this were to happen, but you can do a lot for congregational care on how you set up your pastors. Meaning, like, what's the culture? If they are the guy and they're wowzas, the stud muffin in your church, then you've already started behind the 8 ball if anything were to happen. So I want to say that I think a lot of the culture that you create from the beginning, if you've planted a church, if you are a lead pastor and you want to create a culture that you're not, alone at the top as a rock star, I think that some of the things that have stuck out to me, it's actually I stole from Barna Research. They have a great resource on pastoral health and leading through transitions. And I love Barna because it's so much data, which my head doesn't work with data and stuff. But then they write this beautiful article at the end that just synthesizes the whole thing, right? And I just skip to that. And they talk about any transition, good or bad, or more, pastoral failure, clarity really, really matters, and honesty, concise. So you don't want to, clear, concise. And then this one is like an uncomfortable way to say it, but it says control the story. And it's the concept that our minds are going to finish every story. We are in turmoil until the story is finished.
Okay.
So how do you finish someone's story? Not in a manipulative way, but how do you give them all the information they need to finish the story in their head, right? So it's like, if you are ambiguous with what's going on, then they're going to finish all the sentences that you leave unfinished. So to care for your people, you need to define with clarity, be concise, and finish the story for them.
That's good.
With honesty.
Yeah.
And then another one is consistency. Is we have to remember, if there's crazy trauma, let's think of a hurricane. there's relief, and then there's redevelopment, and you have to like continue, and then they're taking steps towards being back to normal. So many people, we have this impact, and then we have a really tough meeting, and then we'll let you guys know the plans later. So what if you offered roundtables, round table discussions, a month out, 3 months out, 6 months out, and you had a consistent conversation? If you're not trying to hide anything, then have the conversation. Right. If something was going on in my family, I would want my daughter, though she's young, she's 3, to still have opportunities to have a conversation with me about that thing. So that's good. Those are very basic, but
I appreciate that.
Confession too.
Yeah.
Like, even if you're not the one who did something that disqualifies it, how do we confess the places that we need to confess that? Like, I just continue to have to remind myself, humility never goes out of style in any situation. So how can your humility and confession care for these folks? So
that's good.
Good. Thanks, Zach. We have another question from Jody. Jody asks, what if a pastor's drive doesn't consider burnout and sets unrealistic expectations of team members? So, hey, do as I do kind of thing, which means if I'm showing up every day, I'm working 7 to 10, even if it's not stated, there could be those expectations set on a team member. So what do you do if you're, say, a staff person in a church and your lead pastor just seems to go after it all the time?
Yeah.
And subtly implies that the team should be having the same hours put in. How do you manage that? What do you do?
Yeah. I'm not someone who forces clarity. I thrive in the gray of a lot of things. And one thing I say is have the awkward conversation before the awkward situation. So I force clarity, and I'm getting substantially more comfortable with conflict. And I understand talking to your boss or the pastor, depending on where you're at in the system, that can feel very confrontational. Yeah. But what if the question is, hey, can we define reality or define the expectations on me?
Right.
Like, I just gained a couple of staff members this week, and the first thing I'm doing is meeting with them and going over their job description. Yep. And I, as a pastor, wrote covenants for every high octane volunteer, not just job descriptions for my staff, but hey, this is my expectations. Because one, if they don't meet those expectations, and I'm like, why aren't you here till 2 a.m. getting this set done?
Yeah.
And they're like, you never asked me to do that. Then, well, I guess that's right. But if I say, hey, like once a year for Easter, like it's going to be kind of all hands on deck, then you define the expectation. And then the hard thing is, like, another book that I feel like I should just buy like a box of them and have in my car is Boundaries by Henry Cloud.
Right.
And is it Townsend, I think?
Yep. Yeah. Townsend and Cloud. Yep.
The hard thing is we're responsible to be obedient to Jesus and responsible to set our boundaries.
Yep.
And that's actually something I've respected about both of you guys. From afar, I've watched you guys do that really well. And I'm not very good at that. And I've had to, I'm 6 months into this new role. 3 of those months have been COVID-19. A big part of my story of coming here was, man, I need more capacity for my girls. And I want to be able to offer more to cheering on ministries like y'all and church plants. And I coach college soccer, those kind of things. And I've just had to be really, really hey, that seems ambiguous. Can you define reality and expectations for me?
That's good.
And if they won't, or if their expectations are too high, then I'm responsible in obedience to Jesus to respond accordingly.
Right.
And say, I can't meet those expectations. Yep. And that's tough because they could come back and say, well, then whatever. Or a lot of times I've seen leaders respond like, wow, that's really helpful. Like, thanks for doing that. Because so the awkward conversation before the awkward situation could help.
That's good.
And knowing that your identity isn't caught up into what your boss says, that's really tough, right? So if your boss is working really, really hard and you want to run with him, like there's a guy on staff that I really respect, and I joke with him, like, I want to run with you. And you run really fast. You work really hard, and it makes me better. But I've had to do the own work that, like, I'm hearing the voice of God and being obedient to him and not this dude's schedule that I now have on my Google Calendar. And I'm like, wow, he works Friday mornings, or he's in working on his sermon when I'm with my girls. Well, I can decide in that moment what God has asked me to do, you know? So, but that's tough. That's really tough.
Yeah, I think there was, we were operating on a former staff team. We were operating in some pretty, it's just so unhealthy the way we were operating. And at one point, one of the senior leaders said, I don't think anybody on this team works as hard as I do. And that was game on. Like the rest of us went, well, we'll show you. And it was then 90-hour weeks plus, like every week. And, and we did it for a year. And it was just, I think we would even making up stuff to do just so we could punch our time clock. You know, I mean, it was sick. It was wicked. It was nasty, you know.
Taking responsibility for, like, I remember looking back at my first job, and I even used the example, we'd be there till 3 a.m. And I remember when I had to confess that I chose to be there. Like I got calls saying, oh, don't you leave, don't be, you know, whatever. Oh, we need you here. But like, I could have gone home.
Right.
You know, and that's easier said than done. But until I realized that, I won't experience healing for portions that I'm responsible for.
Yeah.
You know?
Right on. Yeah. Josh, there's another comment from Dan, and he's just asking a question that basically is saying, you know, would you approach a member of your congregation who is inadvertently, maybe unknowingly causing you grief or causing you pain? So let's take a poll. How many of us would approach this person who's giving us grief? I would. You know, so Josh, you would not, you would just let them cause you grief?
You know, I think it depends on what it is.
Okay.
So
give an example.
You know,
I'm intrigued. Give an example.
You know, if you feel like somebody is regularly critical, it depends on your ability to process that in truth before the Lord, I think. So if you know, I receive criticism, and most of it I'm not going to address and be like, hey, you know what, I wish you would just cut that out, kind of thing. I don't believe everything people say anyway, which is a perk of my personality. There's plenty of shadow side to my personality. But I receive it and I process through it. Mm-hmm. So I think it just depends on what it is, because overlooking something is actually a really healthy thing to do if you can truly overlook it and not harbor bitterness and unforgiveness. That's a really healthy way to have really good relationships. Love covers a multitude of sins.
Yeah, that's good.
But it doesn't cover all of them.
Yeah.
And so you have to figure out, can I process this with charity, with grace, and be unaffected by the way it was delivered or what was delivered? And if you can, then, I would say no. But if this is regularly, would you approach a member of the congregation who is in an ongoing way, not just a one-off, causing you grief? Then that may be a different story.
Yeah, I do think that there's a bit of a difference between a person that has your best interest and they are giving criticism that is going to lift up and build up, rather than the drippy faucet that's just nagging, right? And, and knowingly, that this person is tearing down. I know the question is in an inadvertent, like they're not, it doesn't seem as though they're coming across to like really like get you, but they're just kind of inadvertently driving you crazy. But yeah, I think I agree with you in that way. It's like, do the internal work. Why am I so twisted up about this? If I'm assuming the best intention and they don't know what they don't know how it's affecting me, then that's a me thing.
Yeah.
If we then get a whiff of, no, I think they're intentionally doing that, then we probably need to understand more of their perspective and then really in a posture of love and servanthood and saying, hey, I want to receive your critique. Could we get together for coffee and let's do this eyeball to eyeball? I always hated the, letter and a half, via the email, especially when I'm like, man, I thought we were good. I thought we were like pretty close, like get together, look me in the eyeball, or at least say, I've got some thoughts. I need to write those out. Could I send that to you? And then could we have a conversation? I received that a whole heck of a lot better than just a lob, so those are the types of things that I guess I'm thinking through with this, but I think it's sit down and have a conversation, get to know them a little bit better. You might see that those things go away. Because you get them. You could get to see that internal motivation that usually is clouded by their actions and their words. Are there any other comments or questions that you guys see here? Because if not, or those who are listening or watching, lob in a couple more. But we're at the top of our hour, and we're gonna kind of wind things down. But if there is another question, go ahead and drop that in the comment. But we're gonna get into the end of Lead Live today. Zach, it's really been an honor having you with us. I know Josh and I have always we've seen your ministry and we've just like, man, that guy's top shelf. And so we appreciate you, dude. We think you do a great job in your roles in ministry leadership, and we're just really grateful that you would spend some time with us talking about this topic. We'd love to have you back on the show at some point. So we'd appreciate you. Not seeing anyone walk to the microphone. Josh, let's give a final thought here today on our conversation about healing from hurt in ministry.
Yeah, Zach, I appreciate you sharing your story and the process that you went through. And I think one of the most important things that a leader can do is become self-aware.
Yeah.
Pain can drive you to or away from self-awareness. And so I know there's certain situations that I'm in that I'm going to be a little more touchy about than other situations. And that's because I've done the work of trying to know myself and to know how God's made me and to know my strengths and to know my weaknesses. I don't want to know my strengths so that I can go around saying, look at my strengths. Mainly, I want to know my weaknesses so that I can remain close to the Lord when those tender spots may be pushed on, or whether I know they're going to be pushed on or not, they actually do get pushed on. So that's one of the best things that you can do as a leader.
That's good. Zach, final thought for you today.
Yeah, I think self-awareness was gonna be mine, but I'll say I think as leaders we will slip into an entitlement. I think a lot of the hurt, even following up from that last question, a lot of the hurt is I'm entitled to something and someone is invading that, right? And if we're really empty vessels, if we're really there to serve our church, how do we steward those places where we feel entitled? And a verse that, Matthew 7 talks about judging others and the speck in your brother's eyes when you have a log in your own. But something that has been so helpful for me is that verse 6. Do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. That's a really intense verse, but your emotions, especially as a pastor, you want to make sure they're holy, they're pearls, even if they don't feel very pearly. There's probably been times I've talked to Josh and I don't sound very pearly, but I know that he won't trample on them. I know that when my wife shares something with me, like she's sharing something that's holy and a pearl, and it's my job to steward that way. So as leaders, be careful that you share what's holy. You don't share what's holy to dogs or throw pearls to pigs. And I've learned a lot from just meditating on that passage.
That's good. Yeah, I think for me, I think the final thought for me here is doing that heart work that Zach that you mentioned earlier, sitting before the Lord and really like allowing time for the Lord to be that healing balm, that salve that will really be able to penetrate and kind of be some Neosporin for your heart. Like we need to have that applied. And if we're going to go other places to medicate, that's what it will be. We'll become addicted to the medications.
Yeah.
And so we need to be rightly addicted to the Lord's presence, to the freedom that he brings, for him to be the balm of Gilead to us. We need to sit and let him apply that.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't even get words out. You don't exactly know. You just know that thing hurt and it stings. And like my little ones who, if they get stung by a bee, sometimes they can't even get words out to describe where, how long is it, the stinger still in there? Like they don't want you to touch it. They don't. And so you just kind of like, you're allowed, but they sit on my lap and they allow me to try to figure out what is continually causing them pain. And for me to try to do what I can to take that stinger out and to then apply something that will bring them relief. But if they don't do that, if they don't help, ask for mom and dad's help, then we can't alleviate that. We can't bring that back to kind of bringing that back down to level. So that's how you do. As you sit before the Lord. There are other things that you can read, but let's be really careful. That's going to be a medication, right? That's not the presence of the Lord. So if we abandon that and we just read boundaries, or we abandon that and we just go to counseling, we abandon that and we just go to friendship, like we can utilize those things to replace this wonderful medicine that is just the presence of Jesus. And I think that's something that we really need to focus on as leaders. And so that's my final thought is bring your stuff into the presence of the Lord, and just allow his spirit to penetrate and to renew us in this area.
Good.
Yeah. So guys, really grateful, Zach, again, for our conversation. Josh, it's always good to be together with these. Viewers, listeners, join us next Monday at 4:00 when we're going to be onward in our journey into season 2. And we're really looking forward. Again, some of the topics coming back to the forefront will be issues of race, issues of ministry leadership, church planting, talking to district superintendents within the Christian and Missionary Alliance, talking to folks who are outside of the Christian and Missionary Alliance about leadership issues. And then I'll also say we would appreciate your prayers for lead students who are launching into their cohorts at the end of June and then all throughout the month of July. We also have second year students. So, if you're a student or a cohort director that are, listening or watching right now, we're praying for you. We so appreciate you. And I think I'll also add, put an alarm on your watch or your phone and join us at 10:02 a.m. to pray that God would raise up more workers from the harvest for the harvest, that you would pray Luke 10:2 with us at 10:02 a.m. We believe that our leaders are the answers to those prayers. If we've been praying that probably about the last decade, but definitely since launching the LEAD program, we are seeing God raise up the next generation of ministry leader, and they're either continuing or launching into their leadership journey. And I'll also say that you can go to leadcma.org/apply to become a student, and we are already seeing students climb into the cohorts for January 2021 launch, and we're really excited about those leaders. Josh, it's been tremendous to see already about 10 leaders jumping in to lead cohorts already, and just God is doing something throughout this season. He's calling people, and he's calling them from around the world. So that's pretty sweet to kind of see. But guys, thanks again for this conversation. Thanks for being a part. And until next time, leaders, we love you. Take care.